You are listening to Beyond the Checkbox, a podcast that focuses on leading strategies around bringing more mental well-being into the workplace. My name is Ryan Todd. I'm a psychiatrist and the CEO of Adversity. I'm sitting down with industry-leading changemakers to break down their process and see how they are going above and beyond for their workforce mental well-being. Good day, listeners, and welcome to Beyond the Checkbox, where we talk to frontline experts and leaders in how to implement more mental health into your organization. My name is Ryan Todd. I'm the host, and we're joined by a special guest, Brad Blaisdell, who's a respect in the workplace expert. And today we had a chance to talk to Kyle Brykman, who is an expert. He's a researcher at University of Windsor, and Kyle talks about and researches and is an expert in organizational behavior and how we think about psychological safety, how we talk about it, how we implement it in our organization. And Kyle is a leading expert in this field. So I learned a ton in talking to Kyle, in particular, some of the ways that you research such a complex topic, and then also how this emerging field of workplace research, organizational behavior is helping leaders, helping organization become better and help really deploy more meaning into the workplace and into the front line. So I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and thanks again for joining. Tell us a little bit about who you are, your research, how you got into this world. It's not typical that you run into a researcher who is exclusively focusing on this topic. That's why I was like, when we met a couple of weeks ago, I was like, man, Kyle, you have to be on the podcast because it's a rare research topic, yet it's very needed and highly applicable in the world. How did you get into this?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting to see how much it's taken off also as a topic in the last decade. So I started my academic career a little over a decade ago, coming from industry. And for me, that's where all the research that I do is informed from my own personal experiences. So I was fascinated. I was lucky enough to work for a great company. I worked for General Mills when I graduated. Great company, great leadership, and especially my own personal leaders. And so being the personality that I am, I have ideas. I like to share them, I think, and research bears it out. You need people to speak up when they see something, even if they don't know the solution, but something's wrong or something's just not right, or it could be better. And I really think that's part of the deep value of me for myself. So even working at General Mills, I remember there's a bunch of times where I noticed something. I thought, well, we could do something a little bit differently. We had one of our clients, we weren't really necessarily tracking the products very well in that organization, and kind of asked why. And they said, my colleague was, that's just the way it's been since I've been here. And I've never been one to accept that as a reason for doing something. And I kind of pushed the envelope, and I was really lucky there to have the support because they embraced the idea. I could tell they wanted to hear from me, and they allowed that idea to take off. But that's really what fueled my research on employees' voice and psychological safety, and this climate of how you can create an environment where people are encouraged to speak up, because it's so easy to keep silent. The benefits are not always there for the individual. They're often there for the organization. And so it's so easy to keep silent. And then you see all these tragedies that happen in organizations, the Boeing 737 MAX as a very recent situation, but it happens throughout where people aren't speaking up, or they're speaking up, it gets silenced. So it's a very personal thing for me. It's a deep value I have. It's my own work experiences that inform it, and it's been what I've been focused in pretty much since I got into academia.
You think that, what I'm hearing is that it's like an economic equation. It's like the risks of speaking up are greater than the rewards, so people don't do it. Is that part of what you? Is that part of the thesis?
Yeah, Ryan, you might as well just be in the literature with us, because
I'll take a spot in the paper if you want to give me one. I'm fine with that.
No, what you're describing is exactly how it gets talked about in the research space. It's this cost benefit analysis. Now, there's obviously different theories, different perspectives, but that's the one that's pretty dominant. That's the one I would subscribe to as well. That people, when you're thinking about speaking up, you kind of do either implicitly or explicitly kind of a cost benefit analysis. Is it, what's the cost to me, and what's the benefit that I get? And also that benefit would include helping the organization, helping my colleagues, helping my customers. But it is this equation. You need to balance it off. The cost of being labeled a troublemaker, being labeled a disruptor, somebody who creates conflict. Nobody wants to have those negative labels. So there is this cost benefit analysis that most people will, whether or not you're aware of it, go through in determining whether you should speak up.
How do you reduce that? Like, how did the best like you were at, did you find that General Mills was one of those companies that you were able to speak up? And like, how did they work to reduce that? Like, I could see there being some cultural things, some training, but like, how do you truly reduce that? Or, I mean, create that psychological safety is what you're getting at.
Yeah, exactly. Psychological safety. Some of the research we look at is we call it a climate of voice. Or my friend Steve Shadletsky has this book that he's put out there now on a speak up culture, and they're all speaking to the same thing of, making it safe for people to speak up. But the flip side of it, or maybe not the flip side, the other lens to it is, I think we get so obsessed about the safe aspect and not so much about, is it even worthwhile to speak up? So when I think about my experience at General Mills, and it's very much, I think, as much as we look at it as an organizational thing, it'll be a team and a leader specific thing, because it's the leader and the team that create that environment mostly. You don't speak up to your organization, you're speaking up to your team members, to your leader immediately. And one thing they did that demonstrated to me that it was a good place to speak up was when I spoke up, they did something. They didn't just say, and I think it would have been enough to say, hey, that's a great idea, let's look into it. They involved me in looking into it, actually implemented my idea. So that made me feel empowered, and still something I look back on that I'm very proud of. Now, I had other ideas. I remember one idea where also I thought it'd be valuable for us to have a little bit more placements in when we're walking around the grocery store, because I was a sales rep as well. Maybe it wasn't the best idea. Maybe not, it wasn't a very high risk, not a big resources, but they still went with it. So I think that's one of the most important things, and often overlooked idea of creating this climate is actually doing something when somebody speaks up, because as soon as you do nothing, you've given them a clear message. Why am I going to, back to the cost benefit, why am I going to put up with any of the potential risks if there is no benefit?
Well, I've done quite a bit of work around, the importance of voice of the client, and why people don't like to do surveys. And I used to work with a colleague, and he was a brilliant man, an older fellow, and he used to always say, if you knew, what would you do? And if you're not going to do anything, don't ask. And that's why a lot of people don't want to participate in surveys or really put themselves out there, because they're so used to the organization asking and nothing changes. And so, encouraging people that we want to hear your voice, but actually have a mechanism that sees action for them providing it, that's when you get more engagement and more people stepping up and saying, hey, I've got a great idea that we could do maybe this a little bit different. And, encourage people to really step up. And if you knew, what would you do?
And there's probably less, like, that's how you disengage people, right? If you're asking for feedback and then they get, which seems from a leadership perspective, like always good to do, like always get tons of feedback. But if you can't, or unwilling or unable to action it, that is the thing that's, you don't often think about that as like it's sometimes a risk even to ask. I don't know if it's a risk to ask, but not actioning it if you hear it overwhelmingly. I find it's sometimes interesting too with the survey thing. Like we've had experiences where they know that they're going to put in a program, this company, and they will then do a survey and be like, okay, we heard you. We're putting in the program from the survey. So they are like, leadership is sometimes forced into a place where they have to have a ready, set solution even before they get the results of the survey back, because it is so risky to not do anything or not action it. Do you think that employees are kind of like...
If you look at an organization like 3M, some of the best products that they've ever launched were from ground floor employees that are encouraged to always be thinking innovation and bringing those ideas forward.
Yeah.
So, you look at organizations that encourage that and foster that from anyone in the organization, that, your voice matters. So we want to hear it. You don't have to act on everything, but recognize, some great ideas aren't necessarily yours just because you're in the senior leadership role.
Kyle, how do you like, what do leaders say about this? Because sometimes leaders would be like, well, how do you deal with crappy ideas? And or we have you have employees that are like actually problematic in speaking up, or like, how do you, I don't know, what do they say about this research?
Yeah, you guys are touching on exactly what I really try to understand with the research we're doing, which is kind of two things. One is how can we speak out better, but the other piece really is got more to do with what do you do when you can't take action because it's unrealistic. And I'll provide training to organizations too. And the first thing I'll say is, you can't act on every idea. Of course not. We had a study where we looked at, it was just published earlier this year in the Journal of Organizational Behavior, where we coded just a little over 5,000 ideas that was posted on an online idea management platform. These are pretty popular systems, and I'm a huge advocate for these systems. Kind of like an internal social media where people will write ideas, other people can see them, like them, dislike, comment on them. So make it a little easier for organizations to gather ideas, especially in the virtual workplace. I think it's a great system to use. And so something that's also pretty interesting with that system is we saw about 18% of the ideas that were voiced were actually acted upon in some way. And, that for me is probably, and it kind of jives with what I've seen in the research, is kind of being the threshold that you expect. So that means probably about, 1 in every 5 ideas is going to get acted upon. The other ones are not. Right? What do you do with those ideas? And there's great research that would tell us, how you respond makes a big difference. You can't act on everything, but can you at least say thanks for being courageous enough to speak up? We talked about the risks and benefits. Can you, provide an explanation and say, well, this is why we're not this time, but we'll think about it later. It's that dialogue that is the problem. This speaks to the idea of fairness in organizations. And there's lots of research on justice and fairness. People are very willing to take bad news or things they don't like, but you need to tell them why. You need to be sensitive to put some risks into it. And so that's what we're trying to see. I've got another colleague who looks at, can you offset it with humor as an example? So it's like, and they're actually finding a little bit of support for this. So there is definitely some new research showing us, how do we do it? How do we turn down ideas in a way that still keeps people coming back and offering more?
That's tough. Yeah, that is a tough one for me. Like I hear, like Ross, he gives me a stupid idea every day that I have to turn down. I'm just joking, Ross. You have awesome ideas. We had like our studio team. I think like with our group that brings in more of the media. Like I think you can action your ideas, right? Like because you just show us, and you're like, you can't do this because it's too technical for you. So they bring it to us, and we're like, that's amazing. I think it's the like bigger ideas that are like, what if we do this for a marketing campaign? And you're like, that's gonna be like a $500,000 marketing campaign. We just can't do that right now. And it's like deflating, right, for some employees who are courageous enough. So I struggle with not just vetting ideas, because as a leader, you're always getting inundated with really good, sometimes not so good ideas. How do you let someone down and say like, we can't just do that right now? That's tough.
Yeah. I think a lot, regardless of the industry sector you're in, you have clients. And I think a lot of ideas should be aligned to the client experience. And those ideas, like those are gold, and getting feedback from clients. If you're exceeding, great. But if you're not, I encourage that, because those are opportunities to improve your services and your offerings. So if your organization realize we're open to ideas that will improve our client experience, then no idea should really be frowned upon.
Yeah.
If they're well thought out, realistically cost effective, right? There needs to be some foundation laid so people don't come to you with a $3 million marketing campaign. But foster ideas and engagement in organizations when people realize my voice matters and I'm valuable here, they want to stay. But if they think no matter what I say isn't going to resonate with any change, they're looking for jobs, right? They're not interested.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a couple things there. One is if you have that culture that it is encouraging of people speaking up, then it's okay to say no this time, because they know it's still part of the ethos, right? This is something we do. It just doesn't mean we're actioning everything.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're describing is actually exactly what my really early research looked at is how do people speak up more effectively. And so one of the elements that we found was that you need to demonstrate the organizational rationale for doing this. It's got to be something that's beneficial for the organization. For example, it's actually helping a customer. You got to make that really clear. So we actually found kind of 4 key elements that make an idea high quality. And then through the research, we see how the high quality is more likely to get implemented, and actually people who speak up with higher quality ideas are actually evaluated more favorably. And we have 2 papers that we published the last few years that show that. And it's really these 4 key elements is that you need to do your homework, show that, it's well thought out, right? You give it a rationale and that it's feasible. Right? That other piece, really hitting on all the pieces that we found, that it's something that you can actually act on. It's not a $3 million idea. It's something that can realistically be done with resources and time constraints. That organizational component, that it is something that's clearly tied to the organization's values, or clearly benefits the organization, and that it's also novel. That was the last dimension that we said that really makes an idea really critical. And so that's one thing I hope leaders also then can create that dialogue of saying, okay, well, if you're coming to me with an idea, make sure that it is thought out, that you've actually done some homework, you've considered the feasibility, you've considered why this is beneficial for organization, and it's not something that maybe we're already doing right now, that it is something a little bit novel for us. Those are ideas that are more likely to get acted upon.
What were the 4 things? That's super helpful. So 1 was novel, 2 was feasible, 3 was well thought out. What was the 4th one?
The organizational focus. So that first piece there was that it actually aligns, either that it aligns with the organization's values and vision, or that there is a clear benefit to the organization, as opposed to, it's something that I need or something for me, which is sometimes what people might speak up with ideas, but they're very, maybe a little bit more self-centered, that you really need to be clear about how does this help the organization?
Yeah.
And our clients, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Internal clients and external clients. How does this help them? How is it going to make them better and us better as an organization?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Kyle, how do you research this stuff? How do you go about, do you do surveys, employee surveys? How do you actually, in a valid way, what's the methodology behind testing some of these concepts? They're sort of not truly tangible concepts. Not everyone knows exactly the things, you can't grab onto it. How do you test it?
Yeah. So, I'm an advocate of multi-method research that, depending on what you're trying to assess, you need to look at it from a different lens. So a lot of my research is survey-based. The one I described a moment ago, and it actually looked at quality, the online suggestion system. So that was a field study, right? So we got archival, we got access to these 5,000 plus ideas in an organization. We got information on how many likes they got, dislikes, comments, on whether they were enacted upon or not. Thanks to a great partnership we were very fortunate to create. And so in that study, we actually coded those 5,000 ideas. We had 2 research assistants help us code those 5,000 ideas for quality based on those 4 dimensions I just described. Yeah. So they rigorously coded these 5,000 messages for quality. And then we were able to see relationships between quality and upvotes when people liked an idea, and the liking of the idea leading to managers actually enacting ideas. So this is one of my favorite studies, because this is, using real data, real world data, actual organizational suggestions, actually implemented or not, actual likes and comments. All we did was code it for those quality dimensions to see how that actually impacts. And it's a really interesting study, because it's not just the quality that's impacting the implementation. What's, I think, really novel about this study is the power of what we call social proof. So when you got lots of, let's say, high quality ideas, it's the people who are on the grounds, the employees themselves, who can evaluate it. And they're the ones who say, okay, this is an idea we want. When you get a lot of ideas that, all these employees are saying, yeah, let's do it, it's very hard for a manager to come in and say, nah, that one's not important. Pretty much what we found was that quality led more people to say, yeah, this is an idea I like, we should do something about it. And managers then in turn responded to that social proof, and they're more likely to act on those ideas.
So there's those 4 factors, right? If they had those 4 things, managers were more likely to take that idea up and implement it.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's through that social proof that, I think it's really fascinating. What it tells me also is how much power we all have when we say, this is a great idea. So it's not just managers that are responsible, but when you hear your colleagues say an idea and you like it, one of my colleagues, Kristen Bain, does some research on amplification and say, this is a great idea, and how people amplify others' voices helps ideas ultimately get implemented.
So in your research, Kyle, I'm interested in when you see an organization that encourages people to come forward with ideas and they actually implement an idea, how do they celebrate it? How do they broadcast that to encourage more people to take that risk and come forward? Like, have you seen good examples of that? Or I'm just curious. People love to hear the word, that's a great idea. And they love to hear it and see it in that, hey, we're going to do this now because you suggested it. That's awesome. But I'm just interested in how do we take that to another level that gets people really coming to work with an innovative thinking mind and wanting to really do better for the organization, not just themselves.
You're tapping into, quite frankly, one of the most basic human needs, and the most critical way we learn is positive reinforcement. When you get that, that check, when you get told you're doing great, it is one of the most powerful motivators to keep doing that thing that you did that made you feel good, and contributing and being empowered in organizations. And this is, a theory that would underlie most of our research in the organizational sciences, of just the power of that positive reinforcement. With the research I've done, I haven't seen too much when it comes to, it's hard to get that kind of insights. In fact, though, with the organization we worked with, we did see them respond to ideas. So it wasn't just whether or not it was enacted on the system. They didn't respond to all the ideas, but a lot of the ideas they would say, okay, this is great. This is what we're doing. This is what's happening. Thanks for the idea. So people got credit on that system. It is one of the most underutilized and powerful things leaders can do. They say, great job.
Yeah.
It's cost you nothing, and it makes such a difference for people. So there's lots of research telling us just how valuable and how, quite frankly, underutilized it is.
Well, and just saying thank you. That's powerful, and very few people use it enough, right? When people do anything for you, thank you for doing that. I really appreciate it. That's huge, and wants them to do more of that. Further to what you said about positive reinforcement.
Yeah, I mean, that's who we are as social creatures. We feed off that feeling of positivity that we get from somebody who we look up to. So underutilized, costs nothing. Thank you. I think there's something with leadership that we think we need to use thank yous so scarcely, otherwise they don't mean as much. I've never seen any support for that idea that people, I think, implicitly hold.
Has that been debated or researched? Because there are, leaders who would say praise is something that, I don't want to say it's a tool, but there would be leaders who use it as a tool. And if you give praise to everyone about everything, you're just incenting everything. I wonder if that's been researched before. Because it's when you said it costs nothing, I would debate that. I think it costs something to give what type of praise, how intense it is, how thoughtful it is. That costs something. And then if you give oh, great job, that costs very little. But there is a cost. So I'm wondering if that's been researched or looked at before.
Yeah, there's a little bit on the sincerity aspect of giving gratitude and giving appreciation. It's not my core area of research to speak to as well, but I think you're bang on with that. It has to be sincere. Like if you're just saying thank you,
Right.
It's not very useful, right? You want to be specific and sincere in the recognition and appreciation you're offering. Thank you for doing, so-and-so, thank you for sharing that idea. It helped us solve a customer need, and now we're in a well-positioned to move forward. We need more ideas like that. That's very specific, that's targeted, that's sincere. Absolutely. Thank yous that are meaningless, it's not going to land, it's not going to help. And there is research on apparent sincerity and being specific when you're giving some feedback in general, but especially thank you. So yeah, that we definitely want to have an asterisk next to the idea of thank you.
I got to work on that with my kids, because they'll bring me something. I'll be like, oh, that's great. Even though their artwork is terrible, I'll be like, oh, great job. But then if they I don't know, bring me food or something, I'm like, that was an amazing job. Well done. Like do more.
You
of
have
that.
work.
And
You have
then
work to do, Ryan.
Yeah. No, I've never advertised myself as a perfect parent. That's for sure. Kyle, is there correlations with size of organization type? Like, I don't know, Brad, you work with hundreds of different types of companies, government, tech companies, like healthcare, like also the way companies are laid out. Like, is there correlations there, or does it all come down to these four factors and how managers respond to the inputs of those ideas?
Yeah, I'd say probably one of the biggest criticisms that I think all of our research is very fair to is we really don't consider enough differences between organizations, and there will be significant differences. Now we'll postulate them, we'll add them into our limitation section and say, well, in this organization, maybe it's a little different and not, but we really don't have enough data or evidence from different organizations to suggest that it would be. But yeah, reasonably speaking, definitely would be. We looked and we did this the same with our research when it comes to novelty being a key dimension of quality. That's going to function very differently if you're in an organization that demands innovation versus a more bureaucratic organization that's not something that is really needed, where actually the feasibility component is something we really need to be a little bit more clear on. So absolutely, but research wise, we just don't have enough data and differences across to be clear, but I think we can be pretty confident that you would see differences.
Like, Brad, you probably find this too when you're working with a university or government, the novelty of the idea is way less important. It's the transparency of the process. When you're working with a tech company or like a leading edge manufacturer, it's about the novelty. Like what are the outputs that can happen because of this innovation?
Yeah, I think it does differ with the industry sector, but still I like to go back to people want their primary role in an organization, and the feedback they want is, do I and my work matter? And is it being recognized? And I don't care if that is a university or a plant floor. People just want to know that they're not just a number and a cog in the wheel, but that my role matters in the big picture of this organization. And if my leaders recognize that and I get feedback, I'm going to come to work with more bounce in my step.
Yeah.
Right. And, psychologically safe workplaces and the best run organizations, no matter what role the person's playing in that organization, they are behind the vision and the mission, and they feel good coming to work.
Yeah.
And that's kind of my thinking. And I've worked with thousands of organizations that the best leaders, they all think that way. My people matter no matter what.
Yeah.
If it's the mailroom clerk part-time hired on Monday, I want to know, what do you like to do when you're not at work?
Yeah.
Get to know, what's your kids' names? Like things like that make you really a leader that cares.
Yeah, everything you just described, Brad, is exactly what I think you said it so well, of what it takes to be a good leader. And those aspects of quality might vary by organization, but the feeling of empowerment and feeling cared for and valued is a fundamental human need. Everybody needs that. And it's small behavior. That's why I love what you were describing there, Brad, because it's small behaviors, just talking to somebody, getting to know them, that makes a difference. I think the most critical thing you do as a leader is care. When you care about the people you're leading,
yeah,
they'll go through a wall for you.
Yeah. Well, and in our industry, Kyle, at Respect Group, that's one of the things that I always plant the seed with the leadership teams is, this initiative will show your people that you care about their well-being and creating a psychologically safe workplace. And that resonates very well with leadership teams, because leaders want to lead, but they sometimes struggle to determine how best to do that. Show that you care. That's, I think, number one thing on a list that all leaders should be thinking about every day. Do my people know I care about them and what they're doing today?
Yeah, like what are the opportunities to show them that?
Yeah.
And how do I actually do it in an authentic way?
Right.
And yeah, that's interesting. That I never really thought about the training in that way, that it could like it gives an easy leadership opportunity, but it's like a authentic way to show that you care, because that's not always easy either, because people receive care and messaging in different ways. And I think there's been this, we talked in another podcast about like authentic leadership and like, what the hell is that really? And how do you do that effectively? And then the pressure, I believe, on leaders is amped up, because now it's like, leaders, you need to be authentic and real and still like perceived as strong and leading and visionary and all these things. Yeah. So I think that having an easy leadership opportunity that's authentic, shows you care, that's something that leaders in my conversations with them are really looking for. It's tough. I think it's tougher now than I don't know, back in the olden days. I don't know. I think there's more pressure on leaders now.
Yeah. I used to work for an individual in Winnipeg at the Winnipeg Sun, and he was an ex CFL player, and his name was Paul Robson, and just an amazing leader. And the one thing that really stood out that I observed is that he made a point of knowing everyone in the organization, and we had over 300 people, and he would remember everyone's name and something about them. And he would, when he would greet them in the hallway, he would say, you know, how's Billy's baseball going? And things that just really stood out for everyone in the organization. Like, hey, this guy's legit and he really cares. He's not just doing this for the sake of, hey, I remembered your name, but he cares about me and my kids at school. And wow, he's not just sitting in the ivory tower in the senior leadership floor and not walking the halls. And the best leaders are the ones that walk the halls and really know everyone.
Yeah.
Right. And make a point of it. So
we had a prof in medical school that he like, we had a class of like 180 and he knew everyone's name. And then there's 4 years of medical students. He knew everyone's name. Like he was a genius in terms of remembering people. And there was one time where, and so actually how this was effective is he would call people out in class to answer questions. So you couldn't hide. Like you would come to his class prepared, because he'd be like, Ryan, what do you think about this metabolic alkalosis? And I'm like, I'm a psychiatrist. And at least that's where I wanted to be at the time. So it was always a struggle for me, medical school, that is. There was one time where there was this overflow room. I swear to God this happened. And there was like this main room. It was a smaller room, and an overflow room with just a camera looking at the prof. And somebody spoke up in the overflow room and he recognized their voice. And he was like, well, that was a great answer. I think it was Roisin. Like, that was a great answer, Roisin. And we were like, what? Did he just call that based on her voice? Like, this guy has 700 students. And he like, anyway, but we respected the hell out of him. Yeah. And I remembered him, and we would be more prepared, had more respect for this guy. And yeah. No, just knowing the names, man, that's a skill.
Yeah, it all connects back, actually, quite honestly, with that trust. You know, there's research on trust and trustworthiness, and it says there's kind of 3 reasons why we find people trustworthy. It's based on their abilities. So how good are they at what they're doing? Can I actually trust them to get the job done well? It's based on integrity. Do I think they're actually going to act ethically and morally? And the last one is called benevolence. Do they care about me? Are they going to do things with my best interest in mind? And that is a critical element of trust. And that's the bedrock of this idea of psychological safety and speaking up, that you trust the person will regard what you're saying and genuinely consider it. So it is foundational to trust, is caring.
Kyle, I want to ask you one last question about like this field of research. Like, I think of universities as like doing more basic research. It's cool to hear that you're doing research on like real life businesses and problems that leaders and employees face. Is this an emerging area of research? Has this always been around and I've just been ignorant to it? Like this highly applicable research on businesses. Like, tell me about that, because I think that's a cool area of study.
Yeah, I mean, it's a field of management, and in my area, organizational behavior, organizational psychology. It's I don't know if it's that new, but it's not that old either. It is relatively newer. Definitely a widely growing area. You think about the COVID pandemic, and I think it really shone a light on just how important it is that we have an understanding. People spend most of their lives at work. We need to make our workplaces better, more effective, healthier, happier. And that's really my life mission. And so there is definitely a growing research field here in management, organizational behavior, of trying to help organizations address real world problems, questions around, how do we make our organizations perhaps more resilient, or how do we communicate more effectively? How do we lead better? And what about in times of crisis? So it's, I think, an incredibly important field. Obviously, it's what I find most passionate about, and definitely growing quite a bit. I'd say it's one of the fastest growing areas in all of business right now.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for spending a little time with us today and talking about your research. It was a fun conversation. And one of the things that drives me crazy about researchers, and you must give them their props for it, if you ever ask a question, even if they're like second or third in the world in terms of expertise, they're like, that's not my expertise. But they'll answer. And Kyle, you do that. You're like, wow, that's not totally my area. But then you give this like mind-blowing answer that like no one has access to and extremely well. But I want to give you props for like, you stay in your lane, but this is super informative in terms of the growing issues around leadership, respect in the workplace, psychological safety. So thanks for joining us and sharing some of your research today.
Thanks for the time. Yeah, appreciate it. This was
Thanks,
great.
Kyle. I enjoyed it. I look forward digging into your work in more detail. So yeah, we'll be talking.
It's great.
Thanks, Kyle.
Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate it.